Alright, legends, welcome along to Hellmouth Hotline. I'm your host, Rodney Stewart. We're getting into Friday the 13th in this episode. We're going to get into this series of movies now after finishing off the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And of course, we're going to be bouncing between these and the Buffy series as we go on, and we'll bounce into the spin-off Angel at some point as well on the show. So Friday nights is going to be the nights we do movies. So Friday the 13th, now this one here, this series in particular I have seen, in all fairness, not much of. Of course, some of the iconic scenes I do know. Been a movie fan, you come across this stuff over the years, but actually sitting down and watching the movies properly, this is probably the first time that I can recall watching Friday the 13th from beginning to end. 1980, of course, the original. Great little movie, and it does at one point have a crossover with A Nightmare on Elm Street. Of course, we've got Freddy versus Jason, so we'll get to that in due course as well. And if memory does serve, at one point in these movies, at the end of the film, one of the films, I can't put my finger on which one it is, but I can recall the mask at the end of the movie on the ground, and Freddy Krueger's gloved hand coming out of the ground and pulling the mask as if going down into hell. So yes, it's one of these ones that I'm really curious to get into and actually check out properly for the show here. So getting into it, it's pretty much your run-of-the-mill slasher movie, really. Camp Crystal Lake. We see 1958 at the beginning. Two counsellors slip off to get bump uglies, let's just say, have sex in a storage cabin in the woods at this lake, where an unseen assailant murders them. And 21 years later, the camp is about to be reopened again. It's the lead up to the summer, and there's some counsellors there and the new owner getting the place ready to get it reopened again. And there's a girl who is hitching her way to the camp, and she gets a lift from this guy, truck driver, and there's this crazy Ralph character in it that was warning her, don't be going to that camp. It's everybody that goes there, you're all doomed, more or less. Like you always have this type of character in these movies. It's the just there to put the fear of God onto people, and this crazy guy's doing that. And of course, this truck driver takes her part of the way to the camp, and he tells her about the troubled past that the camp had, beginning with a young boy that was drowned in Crystal Lake in 1957, who we later find out to be Jason, of course. And after he drops her off, she's like, I don't believe in ghost stories and whatnot. And of course, she's hitching another ride from an unseen person. This Land Rover sort of deal pulls up, and she gets in and gets attacked by this person. We don't see who it is. The face is covered up. Most you see is like from the knees down, and she's getting chased through the forest and whatnot, and she eventually gets her throat cut. And yes, so that's her done for. And at the camp, there's these counsellors: Ned, Jack, Bill, Nancy, Brenda, and Alice, along with the owner Steve. They're trying to get the cabins and facilities refurbished, but a thunderstorm approaches, and the guy who owns the place, he leaves to go to get some supplies. One of the counsellors, Ned, sees someone walk into a cabin and follows. We don't see what happens to him at this point, while Jack and Marcy end up in the same cabin later on. They have sex, of course, and it's always happens in these Friday the 13th movies. You know, somebody gets in there, start bumping uglies, and somebody gets killed, or both of them get killed. And that happens. You know, as they're having sex, though, they're unaware that Ned's body is above them on the top bunk bed. His throat was slit as well. Marcy leaves to use the bathroom, and Jack's throat is pierced with an arrow from beneath the bed. That is an unreal effect for the time this movie came out. That was very, very well done. Of course, the killer follows Marcy into the bathrooms and slams an axe. She gets killed off with an axe. She gets it right in the face. It is fairly brutal. You know, that's for the majority of this film, there's not very much in the way of, you know, graphic murders. You know, there's a lot of kids having fun, messing about, and you know, you always see that there's somebody skulking about in the forest watching them and whatnot. But whenever it does happen, it is brutal. Brenda hears a voice calling for help, and or one of the counsellors later on, and she ventures out onto the archery range, and the lights turn on. Later, Steve returns and recognises the unseen killer who stabs him. I'm losing my place in my notes again. Anyway, worried about the friend's disappearances, Bill and Alice leave the main building to investigate. They find the axe in Brenda's bed. The phones to the camp are disconnected. Ned's truck doesn't work. They can't get out of the camp. Power goes out. One of the guys, Bill, goes to check on the generator, and Alice heads out to look for him and finds that his body pinned with arrows to the generator room door. She runs to the main cabin to hide, only to be freaked out even further when Brenda's body is thrown through the window. So whoever this is coming after her. She's the last one standing, essentially, at this point. Everybody gets taken out at one stage or another in this movie, as far as the main characters go, and the main people in the camp go. Anyway, this body gets chucked through the window. Soon after, Alice sees a vehicle pull up and rushes outside, thinking that it's Steve. Instead, she's greeted by Mrs. Voorhees, a middle-aged woman who claims to be an old friend of Steve and the family. And then she reveals that her son, Jason, the big main villain that you know from these movies, Jason Voorhees, this is his mother in this first one. And she reveals that Jason was a young boy who drowned in 57, and blaming his death on the counsellors who were supposed to be watching him but were having sex instead, reveals herself to be the killer, and she attempts to kill Alice. You know, there's a back and forth, a lot of chasing going on towards the end of the movie. And yes, Alice eventually gets the advantage and decapitates Mrs. Voorhees in a particularly gruesome sequence. And there's just something weird about that one where the head gets chopped off her body and she's still standing, and her hands are reaching up to try and find her head, sort of thing. It's 80s nastiness at its very best. Exhausted after the fight with Mrs. Voorhees, Alice boards and falls asleep inside a canoe which floats out into the middle of Crystal Lake. And suddenly Jason's decomposing corpse attacks her, at which point she wakens in the hospital, surrounded by the police sergeant, medical staff who are attending to her. When Alice asks about Jason, the sergeant says there was no sign of any boy, so she says, well, he's still there then. And the film closes out with showing the ripples on the lake. It is geniusly done in this movie that it could be a standalone or a start to a franchise, which of course it ended up being. And that sequence at the end of the movie where she's in the boat and she's floating about there, and she sees the police coming to the edge of the lake, and then this decomposing corpse of Jason jumps up and grabs her, pulls her back into the water. It is geniusly done that it's almost played off as this is something that she could have imagined, or perhaps it did happen. You're never really given that solid yes or no by the end of this movie. But of course, as we go on, we see more and more of Jason as he keeps coming back to take his revenge on Crystal Lake and the people that are there. Anybody that tries to open this camp again, he comes after them. Now, in saying that there, I am, as I say, fairly new to this series. Like, I know the overall sort of a deal of it, but the real ins and outs of the series, I have to say, not that well versed in. So I'm looking forward to getting into this series in more detail, and looking forward to see these connections between the Friday the 13th movies and Nightmare on Elm Street. As far as the cast goes in this, Betsy Palmer is fan-bloody-tastic in the role of Mrs. Voorhees in this film. We've got a young Kevin Bacon in here. Not really anybody else stood out to me in this movie. Adrian King, Harry Crosby, Larry Bartram, Mark Nelson, Gianni Taylor. That's a weird name. Now I'm going to try to pronounce that properly. Robbie Morgan, of course, Kevin Bacon. The film was a hit when it came out. They had a budget of $550,000 to make this movie, and the box office it made back $59.8 million. These were the movies back in the day. Everybody loved them, and they've become kind of timeless. But I have to say, as far as stacking this movie up against the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, of course, we're getting that crossover on them as well. I have to say, for my money, Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely at this point my favourite of the two. What else we got here? We got the budget for that there, major success. Critical response was divided, with some praising the film's cinematography, score and performances, while numerous others derided it for its depiction of graphic violence. Who in their right mind is going to go to the cinema to watch a slasher movie and then complain about it being too graphic as far as the violence goes? I don't get that mindset of some people. It's like, oh God, I went to see a slasher movie, now I'm offended because there's blood. The 1980 had its snowflakes as well, guys. They just didn't have the internet that they could cry to everybody at every flipping fart's end about something not been good or not been to their satisfaction. Aside from being the first independent film of its kind to secure distribution in the US by a major studio, its box office success led to a long series of sequels, a crossover with Nightmare on Elm Street, of course, and a 2009 series reboot. A direct sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2, was released 1 year later, and that's what we're going to be doing next Friday on the show. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting that checked out, because of course this is whenever you get, this will be the first one we have Jason in there as the main head case, and it's one of these things where people getting into the movies now would probably think that Jason was the big bad from the word go, and for me, I thought that as well for the longest time, but It wasn't to herds. It was some random piece of trivia one night on some podcast I was listening to, where they brought up, who's the main villain in Friday the 13th. And everybody was like, Jason Voorhees, and the guy who was running the podcast was like, no, it was not. It was his mother, Mrs. Voorhees. So, interesting film to check out, and definitely not a waste of your time whatsoever if you've never seen it. But again, for me, if you're going to put Nightmare on Elm Street up beside it, I would prefer Nightmare on Elm Street over this one. But it is what it is. We're going to do these movies anyway because Hellmouth Hotline and all that. So that's going to do it, guys. If you want to get in contact with the show, you can do via the email at hellmouthhotline@gmail.com, and let me know how I can do this stuff better for you. And definitely do rate and review the show, share it along, do all that good social media stuff. I'll really, really appreciate it. Love you forever and all that good stuff. So until the next episode, guys, stay safe, and I'll talk to you all then. This has been a production of Coins Age Media. Thank you so much